The Stoics considered anger to be among the greatest of vices. In fact, Seneca wrote an entire book entitled On Anger, arguing why anger was harmful and explaining strategies to alleviate it. This lesson is about just that, how Stoicism can help us to deal with our anger. But before discussing the Stoic perspective on anger, let's look at an example of what anger can do. Alexander the Great was a famous Macedonian general who was born in 356 BC. At the peak of his military power, the land he conquered and made a part of his empire spanned from Europe to Egypt to Babylon and what is today the Middle East, and even to parts of modern India. It was the largest empire of his time and one of the largest in history. By all accounts, he was excellent in a number of ways, but he was also known to possess a terrible temper. Cletus the Black was a general in Alexander's army. He knew Alexander personally, fought alongside him in battle, and he even saved his life once when he cut off the arm of a Persian satrap about to cut down Alexander from behind. 6 years after Cletus saved Alexander's life, Alexander reduced Cletus's military responsibilities, which angered Cletus greatly. He began to insult Alexander, and the two friends began to quarrel. By some accounts, Alexander demanded to be brought weapons, and his other friends refused and even restrained him as they removed Cletus from the room to save him from Alexander's anger. You can imagine this like a modern-day bar fight, where two groups of friends hold the two shouting individuals back. Eventually, Alexander found a javelin, and in the heat of the moment, threw it through Cletus's chest, killing him. According to every major account, Alexander grieved Cletus's death. This is someone who he did not want to kill outside the grips of anger, but he allowed himself to be overtaken by his anger. This story demonstrates the Stoic view of the main problem with anger. It impairs our judgment and stops us from getting what we really want. Sometimes it is best to ignore what made us angry, but even when we should respond, anger makes us overcompensate and act inappropriately. Maybe Cletus should have been punished for insulting Alexander, but even Alexander himself thought that he should not have been killed. We are not Alexander the Great, throwing a javelin through the chest of our friends, but we have shared in the regret he felt when his anger subsided and he had to face the consequences of his actions. Anger is a complicated emotion, because like grief, it is a passion that many people want to hold on to because it feels appropriate to them. Anger seems not just permissible, but required in certain situations, and someone might even judge you for not feeling the right amount of anger. Imagine if someone insults a loved one. It can seem wrong not to be angry at them and demand an apology. The reason for this complicated relationship with anger is because of its cause. The Stoics thought emotions were the results of value judgments. This is the cognitive view of emotions, and is supported by modern insights in neuroscience and clinical therapy. I am sad when I believe something bad has happened. I am happy when I believe something good has happened. Anger is a complicated emotion because it involves two parts. First, like sadness, it involves the view that something bad has happened to either yourself or something or someone you care about. But anger also has an element of blame. It adds to sadness the view that this harm is someone else's fault. In this way, anger is always directed at a recipient, even if that recipient is the universe itself for being unjust. By developing this psychological insight into what anger is and how it is caused, the Stoics were able to develop a method of alleviating it that did not involve just punishing the one you're angry with. Because anger is a belief, we can control our anger by abstaining from hasty judgments or reevaluating the judgments that anger us. I will cover 3 strategies to do so here. One strategy is to reality check our assumptions about harm. When we have been insulted, have we really been harmed? When we realize that we have not, the anger dissipates. Another strategy is to pause and not act in moments of anger. Passion, the Stoics teach, is like being swept away or running down a hill. It carries a kind of momentum that forces us to continue to act even if we recognize it might be against our better judgment. If we can learn to self-monitor warning signs and pause, maybe also remove ourselves from the situation, we can stop this momentum from carrying us away. A third strategy is to practice a radical forgiveness of others. Maybe someone has tried to harm you, but as Marcus Aurelius points out, we are all acting from our own conception of the good. So this person might have done you wrong, but they were ignorant and mistaken. and they acted as ignorant and mistaken people act. To blame them, to focus on their part in the harm, is a judgment that brings unhelpful anger. I mentioned briefly 3 Stoic strategies for dealing with anger. First, reevaluating if you've really been harmed. Second, pausing or removing yourself from the situation. And third, practicing forgiveness of others. In response to these Stoic strategies, non-Stoics often point out that anger can have benefits. Despite having harmful side effects, they argue that we need anger for motivation. We want to be able to passionately identify and correct harms. The Stoics agree that we want to correct harms, and they don't encourage passivity. But the source of our motivation should be changed from anger, or a focus on the harm, to a desire to do what is right. By internalizing a Stoic outlook, we can be the kind of people who defend our friends from insults, not because we're angry, but because we recognize it is the right thing to do. We should punish those who have done wrong, not because of our anger, but because of the demands of justice. As Seneca says in his book, On Anger, quote, "To become angry on behalf of one's friends and family is the mark of a weak mind, not a mind devoted to duty. The fine and worthy thing is to come forward in defense of one's parents, children, friends, and fellow citizens, with one's sense of obligation actually leading the way, and to do so willingly, deliberately, and prudently, not impassively and furiously." Seneca's point here is that we can do the right thing for different reasons. Just like I can help someone because I recognize it as good, or because I want praise, likewise I can defend my friends because I am angry, or because I realize it is the right thing to do. And the second option is always better. We should always strive to act out of duty instead of anger. Because anger is the result of a judgment that some harm has occurred and that someone is to blame, a Stoic practice around anger involves developing an awareness of the kinds of judgments we make and practicing to make sure these judgments are as careful, intentional, and accurate as possible. Mindful judgment, which involves not succumbing to anger and pausing to reflect when you do, is important because anger has downstream effects. When we experience anger, we do not just suffer in the moment, but we make bad decisions later, and it distorts our ability to reason about our own values. Epictetus describes the mind like a fortress, which guards against thoughts or ideas that would disturb it, and this should be the approach we take to anger. Be especially mindful of judgments where you place a lot of blame onto others. Ask yourself, is this situation as bad as I assume it to be? And even if it is to place the blame upon someone else the right way to think about the situation?